Before there was any other relationship in your life, there was her. Before you knew what love was supposed to feel like, she showed you, not with words, not with a lesson, but with the way she held you or did not hold you, with the way she saw you or looked past you, with the way she made you feel when you needed her most. Your mother was your first mirror, the first person who reflected back to you what you were worth, whether you were too much, whether you were enough, whether your feelings were welcome, or whether they were a burden. And whatever she showed you in that mirror, you believed, not because you were naive, because you were a child. And children do not question the mirror. They just look into it and decide what they see is true. And so before you ever fell in love, before you ever chose a friend, before you ever decided how much of yourself to show, she had already written the first draft of the answer. This is not a video about blame. It is not about deciding your mother was a bad person. It is not about listing her failures or holding her accountable for every wound. Most mothers did the best they could with what they had, with what they were given, with what they themselves were never healed from. But doing your best does not mean you left no marks. And the marks left in childhood are the ones we carry the longest, the ones we do not even recognize as wounds, because they feel like just the way things are, the way love is, the way we are, and that is exactly what makes them so difficult to see, because you cannot question what you believe is simply the truth. The mother wound is not always obvious. It does not always come from cruelty. It does not always come from a moment you can point to and say, that is where it happened. Sometimes the wound is loud. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is invisible even to the woman carrying it. So let us go slowly through the different ways it arrives, because yours may not look like someone else's. And it is important that you recognize your own. Sometimes the wound comes from a mother who was not there, who left physically or emotionally, who was present in the house but absent in the ways that mattered, who fed you and clothed you and kept things running, but could not quite reach you, could not quite see the specific, particular, irreplaceable person you were. She may have been overwhelmed, depressed, grieving something of her own, carrying a weight she never spoke about. And you, the child, did not know any of that. You only knew that when you reached for her, something was missing. And children who reach and find emptiness do not conclude that their mother is unavailable. They conclude that they are not worth reaching for. That is the wound, not her absence, but what your young mind decided her absence meant about you. Sometimes the wound comes from a mother who needed too much, who leaned on her daughter before her daughter was ready to be leaned on, who made her child responsible for her own emotional world, who shared too much, who needed comforting, who needed managing, who needed the little girl to be older than she was, steadier than she was, more understanding than any child should have to be. This is called enmeshment, and it feels like closeness. It can even feel like love. But what it actually is a child being asked to carry what belongs to an adult. And she carries it because she loves her mother, because she wants to help, because helping feels like the only way to keep the connection safe. And she grows up, this little girl, into a woman who does not know how to exist in a relationship without caretaking, who feels guilty when she puts herself first, who confuses love with responsibility, who cannot rest unless everyone around her is okay, because once, a very long time ago, her mother's okayness was her job, and she never got permission to put it down. Sometimes the wound comes from a mother who loved fiercely, but conditionally, Whose love felt warm when you performed well and withdrew when you disappointed her? Who praised you for your achievements and went quiet when you failed? Who made you feel chosen when you were good and subtly othered when you were not? This is perhaps the most confusing wound of all, because the love was real. You felt it. It was there, but it had conditions attached that were never spoken out loud. And so you spent your childhood and then your adulthood trying to stay on the right side of those conditions, trying to remain the version of yourself that kept the warmth coming, trying never to disappoint, trying never to need too much, trying never to be too difficult, too emotional, too much. And you became very good at being palatable, at being easy, at editing yourself before anyone could reject the unedited version, because rejection from your mother, even a small withdrawal of warmth, felt like the floor dropping out from under you, and you have been bracing for that feeling. In every relationship since, sometimes the wound comes from a mother who was critical, who corrected more than she affirmed, who noticed what was wrong before what was right, who had high standards that felt like a measuring stick. And you were always a little too short. Her criticism may have come from love, from wanting the best for you, from her own fear that the world would be harder on you if she was not. But what landed in you was not the intention. What landed was the message that you were not quite enough, that there was always something to fix, that the woman you were becoming needed adjusting. And so you grew up with a voice in your head that sounds a lot like hers, noticing your flaws before anyone else can, correcting yourself constantly, holding yourself to a standard that moves every time you get close, never fully allowing yourself to rest in the feeling of being enough, because enough was never quite the message you received. Sometimes the wound comes from a mother who was grieving, or struggling, or sick, or simply broken in ways that had nothing to do with you. A mother who was doing everything she could just to survive her own life. And you, her child, watched her struggle, and you learned to make yourself small so as not to add to her burden. You learned to need less, to ask for less, to manage your own feelings in private so that she would not have one more thing to carry. You became invisible by choice, not because you were unwanted, but because you loved her enough to disappear. And now, you are a woman who disappears when things get hard, who shrinks when she senses someone is overwhelmed, who silences her own needs before they can become an inconvenience, who has become so fluent in making herself small that she has almost forgotten what it feels like to take up the space she deserves. And then you grew up and you walked into your first friendship and your first love and every relationship after that, and you carried the mirror with you, because here is what no one tells you about the mother wound. It does not stay in childhood. It travels. It moves with you into every room you enter. It sits with you at every table. It shapes every relationship you have ever tried to build. Not just romantic ones, all of them. It shapes the friendships you chose, the ones where you were always the listener, always the one who showed up, always the one who held space, but rarely received it in return. You gravitated toward people who needed you, because being needed felt like being loved, because usefulness felt like belonging, because the friendships where someone leaned on you felt familiar, and the ones where someone simply enjoyed you felt strange, almost uncomfortable, because being enjoyed without being useful was not something you learned at home. You learned to earn your place, and so you earn it everywhere you go. In every relationship you enter, working a little harder than you should have to, giving a little more than is given back, staying a little longer than is good for you, because leaving feels like abandonment. And you know what it is to be on the other side of that. It shapes the way you handle conflict, the way a disagreement in a relationship can send something primal through your body, something that is not quite about the argument in front of you, something older, something that remembers what conflict meant when you were small, whether conflict meant silence, or raised voices, or withdrawal, or that particular coldness that is worse than anger, because at least anger is a kind of presence. And so when conflict arises now, you respond from that old place, not from the woman you are today, from the child who learned what conflict costs, who learned to apologize quickly to make it stop, or to go quiet and wait for it to pass, or to escalate because the tension was already unbearable and you needed it over, or to dissociate entirely, to leave the room inside yourself while your body stayed and handled it. None of these are flaws. They are strategies. Strategies that kept you safe once. Strategies that your nervous system has never been told it no longer needs. It shapes the partners you chose, because what your mother taught you about love became your definition of love, not consciously, not deliberately, but deep in your nervous system, in the part of you that moves before your mind does. You learned what love looks and feels like, and you have been looking for that feeling ever since, even when that feeling was not safe, even when that feeling was not kind, even when that feeling was inconsistent and conditional and left you always slightly anxious, always slightly unsure if you were enough. If your mother was emotionally unavailable, you learned to chase, to perform, to try harder, to earn presence, and so you found partners who were hard to reach. And you worked to reach them because that felt like love, because that is what love felt like. If your mother needed you to manage her feelings, you became a caretaker. You learned to scan the room before you entered it, to sense the emotional weather before it was spoken, to put yourself aside and attend to whoever needed you most. And so you found partners who needed saving, who needed fixing, who needed someone to hold them together, because taking care of someone felt like belonging, because that is what belonging felt like. If your mother's love was warm and then cold, present and then gone, approving and then distant, you learned to live with uncertainty. You learned that love is something that can disappear without warning, and so you stayed alert. You stayed small. You stayed careful. You did not ask for too much. You did not want too openly, because wanting too much made love go away, and then one day you are in a relationship that feels familiar, that feels like home, and it is not a good home, but it is the home you know, and your nervous system does not know the difference between familiar and safe. It only knows what it recognizes, and it pulls you toward what it recognizes with a force you can feel in your whole body. This is not weakness. This is not stupidity. This is not a flaw in your character. This is the blueprint, the one that was drawn before you were old enough to hold the pen, the one that was written into you before you knew you were being written. And it has been running quietly in the background of every relationship you have ever had. There is something else that happens, something that does not get spoken about enough. The daughter who became her own mother too soon. Not just the daughter who caretook her mother, but the daughter who, somewhere along the way, stopped waiting for someone to take care of her and simply became the one who takes care of everyone. She is the woman in the room who notices when someone is struggling before they say a word, the one who anticipates needs, who prepares, who thinks 3 steps ahead so that no one ever has to feel uncomfortable on her watch. She is remarkable. Everyone says so. She holds things together beautifully. She is the person people call in a crisis, the one who shows up, the one who stays. And inside, very quietly, she is exhausted and a little bit lonely, because the woman who mothers everyone rarely gets mothered herself, because she learned so early to be self-sufficient that she has made herself almost unreachable, almost impenetrable, not because she does not want to be held, but because being held requires a kind of vulnerability that she was never taught was safe. She learned that vulnerability meant being a burden. She learned that needing things was an imposition. She learned that the way to be loved was to be useful, and so she is useful, endlessly useful, and quietly starving for someone to simply sit with her, without her having to do anything, without her having to hold anything together, without her having to earn it. The grief of the mother wound is a particular kind of grief, because you are not just grieving a person, you are grieving a version of her that never existed, the mother who was fully present, the mother who saw you completely, the mother who made you feel safe to be exactly who you were. You are grieving something you needed, that you never received, and that grief has no clear beginning, no clear event to point to, no moment you can name and say, that is when it happened. It is a grief that lives in the gaps, in the things that were never said, in the comfort that never came, in the moments you needed her and learned to need yourself instead, because that is what happens. When a child cannot get what she needs from her mother, she does not stop needing it. She just learns to stop showing it. She learns to fold herself inward, to become self-sufficient before she is ready, to manage her own feelings because there is no one to manage them with her. And she grows into a woman who is remarkable at holding herself together and terrified of truly leaning on anyone, a woman who gives everything and finds it almost impossible to receive, a woman who knows how to be strong, but has almost forgotten what it feels like to be held. And she enters her relationships carrying all of this, looking for the safety she never had, looking for the warmth she was rationed, looking for someone to finally see her the way she always needed to be seen. And sometimes she finds someone who comes close, and it is so disorienting. She does not know what to do with it, because safe love does not feel like home. Not yet, not at first, because home was not always safe. And this is perhaps the cruelest part of the mother wound, that when love is finally offered without condition, something in you does not trust it. You wait for it to change. You look for the catch. You pull back just before you are fully in, because being fully in means being fully exposed, and fully exposed means fully available to be hurt. So you test, sometimes consciously, sometimes not. You push a little to see if they will stay. You go quiet to see if they will reach. You find reasons to doubt, because doubt feels safer than hope, because hope has let you down before. In the most fundamental way a person can be let down, before you even had the words for it. And so even when love is real, even when it is consistent and kind and asking nothing of you that you cannot give, a part of you remains on watch, waiting for the withdrawal, waiting for the conditions to appear, waiting to find out what version of yourself this person actually wants. This is not sabotage. This is survival. This is the nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do, protecting you from a pain it remembers. Even when the present moment does not require protection, healing the mother wound does not mean erasing her. It does not mean cutting her off. It does not mean rewriting history or pretending the wound was not real. It means understanding, truly understanding, that what happened to you was not evidence of your worth. It was evidence of her limitations, her unhealed places, her own wounds that were never tended to, that the mirror she held up to you was not an accurate reflection. It was a cracked mirror held by a woman who was also cracked. And you have been living by its reflection for far too long. Healing looks like grieving what you did not receive, not rushing past it, not being reasonable about it, not reminding yourself that she did her best. Before you have fully allowed yourself to feel what you missed. The grief comes first. The understanding comes after. In that order, not the other way around. Healing looks like learning to notice the blueprint in action. Catching yourself in the moment you begin to shrink. In the moment you start earning your place. In the moment you feel that familiar pull towards someone unavailable. And pausing just long enough to ask, is this love? Or is this just familiar? Healing looks like learning to receive, which is harder than it sounds. Because receiving requires believing you deserve what is being offered. And that belief, for many women carrying this wound, has to be rebuilt almost from the ground up, slowly, patiently, with a great deal of gentleness toward the part of you that still flinches. When someone is simply kind, healing looks like reparenting yourself, giving yourself what she could not as a performance, not as a self-help exercise, but as a genuine, daily, unglamorous practice of choosing yourself, of speaking to yourself the way a safe mother would, of noticing when you are exhausted and letting yourself rest without first finishing everything on the list, of asking for what you need, even when it feels like exposure, of allowing someone to show up for you without immediately looking for the way to pay it back, of sitting with the discomfort of being cared for until it starts to feel less strange, until it starts to feel like something you were always allowed to have. You are allowed to grieve what you did not receive. You are allowed to acknowledge the wound without weaponizing it. You are allowed to love your mother and still name what hurt. You are allowed to have compassion for her journey and still choose to stop carrying what she handed you. Because the work is not about her anymore. The work is about the blueprint, looking at it honestly, asking yourself, where do I still seek what I did not receive from her? Where do I still perform to be loved? Where do I still shrink to keep the peace? Where do I still chase what pulls away? Because pursuit feels like proof of love, and slowly, gently, without judgment, beginning to draw a new blueprint, one that you choose, one that knows what safe love looks like, one that can recognize warmth without suspicion, one that can receive without immediately wondering when it will be taken away, one that understands that love does not have to hurt to be real, that consistency is not boring, that someone staying is not something to distrust, that you do not have to earn your place in every room you enter, that you were allowed to take up space. From the very beginning, you were shaped by your first relationship, but you are not imprisoned by it. The blueprint can change. You can change, not by erasing where you came from, but by finally understanding it clearly enough to choose something different, by becoming, for yourself, the mother you always needed, the one who sees you completely, the one who stays when things are difficult, the one who does not ask you to be smaller, the one who tells you again and again and again that you are enough, exactly as you are, without performance, without condition, without having to earn it for even one more day. She was your first mirror, but she does not have to be your last. You get to decide what you see now,